whisking to write you a pretty little poem, but I work my dirty brittle fingers to the bone to make payments on a home that I will never own. Sure, there's better things in life, but I will never know. There's more going on than the TV will show, but they keep you too busy to believe what you know. So evil will grow, you won't reap what you sow. You're older, those control lose, cheated and soul. See, this is what I'm thinking, falling asleep as the sun slowly rises. When my crusty eyelids crack open, I won't give a fuck what the time I'll be back on some bullshit hustle, back on some meaningless grind. Paid shit, slaving for the matrix, struggling to make it with my 9 to 5. What is life? I'll tell you what life seems to be to me.
Hello and welcome to the Black Flag Podcast. Joining me today is my co-host Daniel Hansen.
How's it going?
Brett is here with us today, and our featured guest is Rebecca Whiting. How's it going today?
Good.
All righty. So one of the reasons we had Rebecca on is because we've talked on the phone. We work together in the Libertarian Party, and we've talked on the phone before. And I've always just been really impressed with your story, and I think it's deep and moving, and it's interesting how you reached your level of activism. So I just kind of wanted to do like not a traditional Black Flag episode, but do more of like just an interview of your life and your perspective, because you've been through a lot and you've seen a lot, and your perspective from that is invaluable. So I guess I'll just start off with just where were you born?
Southern Mississippi, in a little town about the size of Bemidji called Picayune.
Okay. And then how was your upbringing? Like, what did your parents do?
Well, I was adopted, so from birth, and we moved around a lot. Was born in Mississippi, but lived in Texas, Louisiana, Kansas. Ended up actually still graduating high school in Mississippi. We just seemed to always be on like this two-year rotation. We just always move someplace every 2 years or so. And so it just worked out. I ended up born in the South, graduated high school in the South, was in the South in between. And then, so, I mean, that's pretty much it. Just moved around a lot. Saw a lot of different areas of the country.
Were you the oldest or youngest?
Yeah, I was the oldest, because the reason I was adopted is because that my parents couldn't have their own children.
Okay.
And so I was the first adoption that worked out for them.
Okay. And then they adopted other kids then?
One other. So I have an adopted sister that's younger. She's about 3 years younger.
So how many people did you grow up with then?
Just us four, basically.
4 kids. Okay. Solid number. I got soon to have 4 kids. So then, like, what kind of happened next in your life? What did you do for work after did you go to college?
Well, I graduated high school in 2000.
Okay.
So things growing up were kind of a little unstable. And so when I finished high school, I found myself being on my own and really just trying to support myself. And I always had this drive to go to college, but I mean, Southern Mississippi is a very poor area. So there wasn't a lot of jobs, especially for a woman, like for a man or even a guy, just like graduating high school. There was, you could go work offshore on the oil rigs, you could logging. There was just so much but like for me, I worked in a bakery. So making $5 an hour.
Wow.
And just was very unsatisfied, like that, thinking that was all as good as it was going to get. I was never going to be satisfied with that. Mm-hmm. So I joined the Army. I graduated high school in May of 2000. By September, I joined the Army.
So 2000, right?
Yep, 2000.
What was your perspective on politics at the time?
I didn't really think about it. My personality has always been like hyper independent.
Okay.
So when it came time to, if somebody told me, oh, you shouldn't do this, that's exactly the reason why I was going to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's when it like came to the Army. This was, for me, it came down to, I just didn't have any good reason why I shouldn't join.
Mhm.
And it was my way out of Southern Mississippi. So I joined and left.
So you really wanted out of that area, or you just wanted out of your family situation, or
A little bit of everything.
a
Yeah,
little bit of
I
everything?
wanted some distance. Like I said, there really just was not much down there.
Okay.
Not for opportunity wise anyways. And I didn't really know, like I knew I wanted to go to college, but I didn't know what I wanted to do for college.
Yeah.
I had played soccer all the way through my childhood, high school. And so I was on a full ride soccer scholarship. I had that opportunity uh, for college. And so when I joined the Army, I initially joined the National Guard. And that way I could do my training and then I could do the training, basic training and my advanced individual training in between soccer seasons.
Wow.
I wouldn't miss anything. So I ended up, after my training was over, I did end up coming back to the National Guard in Southern Mississippi. But while I was in basic training, I had made my mind up that I I had made a mistake by joining the National Guard and not just going active duty. So when I got out of basic training, but I had signed a contract for being in the National Guard, so I
What made
wasn't
you
really
want
way upset.
what made you wanna do active duty, though?
I really liked the structure. I really loved the feeling of being part of something that was meaningful. So there was opportunity for having a regular paycheck. There was security in the job. There was always some place. Like at that point, before I went to basic training, there were a lot of nights I was living in my car. So
Oh,
I
wow.
was working, but I didn't have like a stable place to stay all the time. And so the summer before, like I joined the National Guard and the summer before college, I didn't have a place to go. And so a lot of nights in between shifts, I was just sleeping in my car at rest stops. So like having the opportunity of, you always know, you always have a place to sleep. It's going to be safe. Where you're going to eat. You always have a regular paycheck. If something goes wrong, you can just go get, treated at the aid station or whatever. And then, just really being part of something that was bigger, that was meaningful. That was really the ultimate part of that. Like I always felt like there was just something, there was more than just, a 9 to 5 job and paying your bills. There had to be something bigger in life.
Okay, yeah, so how many people do you think were in a similar situation in the Army? I know, like, the highest recruiting areas are the South, and
Yeah.
I don't know if they still struggle a lot with poverty. I
Oh
know
yeah, you do.
we did a Southern Reconstruction with Ryan Dawson and Reed Coverdale. That was probably one of my favorite episodes,
I should watch that.
but
That sounds very interesting.
it was good.
Yeah, yeah.
And
There's a disproportionate amount of members in the armed services that are from the impoverished South.
Well, I
and don't
mean, I knew people in high school that had like 3 sets of clothes, that they were living in rundown mobile homes where the floors were falling in. That, they came to school and that's where they ate their meals at. I mean, you're talking about like it's hard to imagine when you're surrounded by so much that's, you have plenty. But
yeah.
and down there's the benefit of, not having winter. So, you could live in a house like that basically all year round and you're not going to freeze to death. So
That is true. And then were you married at any point in that time?
I got married. So I met my ex-husband in high school. Uh, People in the South tend to get married and do everything at a very early age. I knew girls in junior high that were having babies.
Wow.
So like the high school dropout rate is very high. It's just, and it all, everything that you can relate back to poverty. I mean, that was just like the stereotypical, that's the way it was. So we had met when I was 16. He graduated high school a year earlier than I did, and he'd also joined the Army. And then he was active duty, though. He didn't join the National Guard. He was active duty. So when 9/11 happened, he was in a Ranger battalion. And in Ranger battalion, they're not special forces, they're special ops. So when something big happens, the Ranger battalions, and there's 3 Ranger battalions on different parts of the country. They're each on a different level of alert. And he just happened to be on the highest level of alert when 9/11 happened. So when that happened, it was pretty much like they had their mission and they were leaving right away. And suddenly everything just felt very serious, like he's going to war. I was already in the Army by that time. I'd already been through all my training. And so you're like confronted with all this, things that at 20 years old are just really big. And life, so we were like, well, we'll just get married. And we did. It was just like that. So because of 9/11 too, they were allowing everybody that was National Guard, if they wanted to go active duty from National Guard. And I took that option. So I ended my National Guard contract early to go active duty. And I signed the contract on, must have been February like 20th or something. He and I got married on February 22nd, and I left for active duty Army. No, we got married on the 25th, and I left for active duty Army on the 28th. So within a week, it was just like, I'm leaving and I'm married, and bam, everything's different.
And then did you guys see each other when you went overseas, or?
No,
So how long was it till you saw him again?
Well, there was just like anyways, it was pretty quick because I already had my training. Yeah. And he had just gotten home. The deployments for somebody in Ranger Battalion are different than just like a normal infantry brigade or something like that. Like our deployments were always 12 months. That's just the way it is. 12 months you're gone. But Ranger Battalion could be gone 2 to 4 months. And they got sent very quickly, but they also came home much faster. So he had already left and come home from a deployment by the time that 6 months later we were married.
That's pretty fast.
It was everything that when 9/11 happened, everything just like all of a sudden was just like so fast.
So what was your religious perspective back then? How were you raised?
I had grown up in the Christian church, but I hadn't really internalized it. So I knew, I had an idea of God and all that kind of stuff. And, my checklist of what I should do to be a good Christian, but I hadn't really like, I don't know. It wasn't part of me at that point.
Okay. So what was the biggest shock when you got into the Army? Was there anything that just stood out to you? When did you start becoming more anti-war, I guess?
Oh, that took a while. Because like part of being in the Army is, you really have to believe that what you're doing is right and good to do well in the Army and follow instructions. That was the part I struggled with the most, was just people telling me what to do. But
how did they ingrain that into you?
Oh, they never did. I won that battle and got out eventually. So they never did. No, in fact, I remember at one point my sergeant major of our battalion telling me, she was like, "You're too smart to be in the Army. You need to get out." And I was like, I heard her say that, and I didn't tell it to her because that would have been extremely disrespectful, and I probably would have gotten into a lot of trouble. But in my mind, when she was telling me that, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to stay in. And I'm going to do really good at this just because you said I shouldn't. So I did.
So, and what made you become a part of the medical team, I guess? How'd you get into that part?
Yeah, that was just, it was, you had a number of jobs, and as a female, you're very limited.
Mm.
So you're not allowed to be in combat arms. You're not allowed to do any of that unless you're a medic. And so I didn't want to just be in the Army. I wanted to be like, doing what Army people do. I was never the kind of person that was going to be satisfied sitting on the sidelines and watching other people. And so when it came time to picking a job, my recruiter was like, "What about combat medic?" And I was like, "Oh, sure, that sounds great. I'll just go with that one." It was the only job I considered. So,
wow. So was that pretty atypical for women to pick that type of role?
No, because there's a lot of female, a lot of opportunity in the medical for women. And so probably.
Do you think you were one of the few that sought it out just because you wanted to see combat?
I have no idea. I never asked anybody else. So, yeah, it was probably like 50-50. But there's a lot of opportunity for men as medics because they're the ones that are attached to the infantry, the artillery, the cavalry. So women aren't going to be allowed in those to be attached to those types of battalion, or they weren't at the time because they're combat arms. And I believe that's changed since then. But we were attached. We could be in an infantry brigade, which is like a brigade is made up of a whole bunch of battalions. And then the battalions are like the infantry, the cavalry, the artillery, and they make up the brigade. So everybody has their own job in the brigade. The battalions do. And but in every brigade, you have a support battalion. And the support battalion is where the medics are. And the medics are typically one company in the support battalion. And it's just, so we manage the aid station. We had evacuations. So we managed like if somebody needed to be treated and put into an ambulance and then transported someplace else or put into a helicopter, that's what the evac team did. And so there was just these different roles even within the medics company. And but those roles could be filled by women. So not the combat arms battalions, but the support battalion could be filled with women. Even though we could be temporarily attached to the infantry battalions to go on missions, we couldn't be officially assigned to them. So it was a little different.
So your first year overseas, you were combat medic, or did you have to be trained in overseas?
No, by that time, so the Iraq War started in 2003. By that time, I was in the Army already for 3 years. I got orders to go to Korea, and the brigade in Korea had orders to deploy to Iraq. And so they deployed us from Korea to Iraq. And that was in 2004 when that happened. So by that time, it had already been going on for a year. By the time I left, I'd been in the Army for 4 years already. And so I already had a pretty substantial background in what I was doing, because 4 years is a long time. It was like enough for a full enlistment almost.
Yeah.
So yeah, so during that time, part of like just being in the Army is always, there's just this constant state of training. So no matter like your daily job, in addition to that, you're always training for something bigger and greater: leadership, medical skills, like all these different things that are also necessary just for growth, for being a soldier.
So did you kind of enjoy all of that?
Oh, yeah, I loved it. So
you liked being trained every single day. And have you always had, like, you are probably one of the most productive people I know. Like I joke to people, like, she must just have more hours in the day than I do. Like, I don't know how you fit it all in, but have you always been like that?
Yep. And I remember in school, like my mom and my dad going to parent-teacher conferences, and the thing that my teachers always told them was that she is just so busy. So like always like just moving from one thing to another. That was, and my mom would tell, even as a little kid, Like I was just always into everything. So
do you think that was just because of your upbringing, or is it just your personality?
I think it's just my personality. Yeah. And if my mom could have done anything to change it, I think she would have slowed me down. Yeah.
So now you're in the Army. You've been in there. It's like 2005. Well,
2004 is when we left.
Okay. What year did you leave the Army?
I left in 2007.
Okay. So 4 to 7. That's.
Yeah. By that
Quite a
time,
while.
I had 2 deployments under my belt. I'd been in for over 7 years. And it was just, well, and I'd gotten remarried. So I'd gotten divorced and then I'd gotten remarried. And when I got remarried, I got remarried to another soldier. So, and he was also infantry.
Okay.
So he had orders, Keith had orders to go to Fort Jackson, South Carolina to be a drill sergeant to train new soldiers. Because by that time he was a staff sergeant. He had some rank. He did actually really well in the Army. And so he had orders to go to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And I didn't have enough time left in my contract to go with him. So I was going to end up being stuck behind at our old unit while in Colorado, because by that time we were in Colorado. And so I was going to have to live in Colorado and he was going to be living in South Carolina. And so I just decided to get out at that point.
Okay. Let's see. So was that out of a deep-seated, so that it was just purely practical? Was there any just anti-war at that moment, or did that come later?
That came later. At that point too, I was just really feeling the effects of the deployments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Keith was, well, and he wasn't actually doing very well either, because our first deployment had been in the Al Anbar province in Ramadi. So if you go and Google Ramadi, Iraq, there is just like everything horrible and terrible that happened during the war all happened in Ramadi. That is just, I mean, and anybody that's ever deployed there, if you like, that is, there's not really, like, I couldn't describe to you what it was like. It was the worst of the worst. And so we were there from 04 to 05. That was during the Second Battle of Fallujah. And Fallujah was the neighbor to Ramadi. So our neighboring city was Fallujah. And then when the Battle of Fallujah happened, that happened in, I think it was November or December of 04 that happened. And prior to the Battle of Fallujah, Ramadi was already just a horrible place to be stationed. It was already just really bad. Like, we were taking casualties, American soldier casualties, every single day. And typically when casualties happened, it wasn't usually just like one person, but it was everybody that was in the truck, which could be 3 to 4 people. So, and these were like, I mean, soldiers that were part of our brigade. So because of our situation, we all knew each other. And if we didn't know them directly, we knew somebody that knew them, like, so we're just all very interconnected. And when Battle of Fallujah happened, after it was over, everybody, all the insurgency that fled Fallujah came to Ramadi. And so after the Battle of Fallujah, Ramadi, there was just like this very intense uptick in activity, and it had already been pretty bad. So we just, I mean, when we left that deployment, we had battalions that were under combat strength. That means that they had taken so many casualties that they were having to be reinforced from outside battalions just to help them continue on their daily mission. And we held that. From that deployment, our brigade held that the highest record of casualties for one deployment for the entirety of the war. And that was that was in 2004, 2005. And the war went on for 16 more years. So our brigade, we lost. It was such an intense amount of people that we lost. So that's what happened our first deployment. We come home. We're home for about a year. And the way that it works is that your first deployment, before you even get home, because you're on a regular rotation. So before you even get home from the deployment that you're on, the Army already has you penciled in for your next deployment. So you already know where you're going next. And we already knew when we got home from Ramadi that we were going to be in Baghdad next. And we already knew when. And so we're home for a little over a year. It was about 14 months. And in that time, we're doing training. We're making sure all of our gear is ready. We're making sure, weapons qualifications, all of these things. And we're bringing new soldiers because there's this regular rotation of old soldiers out, new soldiers in. So we're integrating the new soldiers that have become part of our brigade since then. And then in September, end of September of 2006, we left again. And that time we went to Baghdad. So Baghdad in 2006, I think it must have been December or January of 2006. It might have been sooner than that. I can't remember, but that's when the surge happened. And so President Bush announced they're going to have this, push of new soldiers, 30,000 new soldiers in Iraq to help with the mission. The problem is there weren't 30,000 soldiers. So that the way that they came up with that number was just by keeping the soldiers that were there for longer than their 12-month deployment. So our 12-month deployment became a 15-month deployment. So we're there for the surge. And in that amount of time, in between Ramadi and Baghdad, warfare had changed to the degree where in Ramadi, we were facing a lot of roadside bombs, things that were, just artillery shells sometimes and explosives that were put under the ground. You drive over them, they blow up, and that was their main way of fighting against American soldiers. But when we got to Baghdad, those were different because Baghdad had the largest factory in Iraq for making these copper discs that were used for oil drilling, for drilling through bedrock. But their insurgency was taking those copper discs and putting explosive charges behind them. And so that those, when they were exploded, the copper disc turned into molten copper and could punch through the Kevlar in our up-armored vehicles. So, and doing an incredible amount of damage. So that was the second deployment. That one I was on the road almost every night. I was on a security platoon by that time. So we were doing missions out in the city. We were doing QRF, which stands for Quick Reactionary Force. QRF means that if there's a firefight, you need to help collect casualty bodies, KIAs, out in the city. If there's a vehicle that's been blown up that needs to be recovered, you call the team on QRF. And within 20 minutes, you're supposed to be able to be ready on the road, out the gate, and helping with whatever the situation is. So I did that for that deployment and came home after that deployment. I was not doing well and dealing with a lot of anxiety and just PTSD things, but in that stages, it was all very new to me. I had never experienced it before. So that was what pushed me to get out, really.
So was the surge in Baghdad one of the worst in terms of casualties for you as well?
For us, it was very different because
Do you think they pulled people from, you said Ramadi? Was that?
Ramadi was.
Ramadi. Did they pull people from Ramadi and put them in Baghdad just because they knew they had
Ramadi
experience?
had its own mission at that point also. So our brigade was actually still supporting Ramadi. Part of them was while we were in Baghdad. So our brigade was split in between the two cities during that deployment.
So was it more in Baghdad that it really started to hit you, or was it more when you came home that the PTSD started to really kick in?
It was at home because while I was deployed, I had a job to do and I could focus on that job. when I came home and things calmed down and it was quiet. That was where it started really having a hard time.
So I don't want to pry too much, but you lost pry away. Okay. All right. So you lost people. Can you tell us, some of these people were, you probably were how close were you to these people? Was it just some of them just acquaintances? Were some of them, your best friends?
A little bit of everybody. When you're in that kind of a situation, the situation bonds you to people, just because you're in the same crappy thing together. And so I remember one time, for instance, and when I'm not sure of the numbers of exactly how many we lost, but this happened in October. We'd only been there for a month by that time. So we got there in September, very beginning of September.
Ramadi?
This is my first deployment in Ramadi.
Okay.
Get there, very beginning of September. In October, and we'd taken KIAs already, like up until that point, like the casualties were already rolling in. And
KIA stands for
killed in action.
Okay.
And we played a lot of card games in our free time, right? So we played a lot of spades, and there was, no shortage of, people, it was just always like, you smoked cigarettes and you played cards. That's what you did in your free time. And so we went out in this mission, and I was the medic for the mission. And so the mission started at like 3 a.m. in the morning. So you're not waking up in the morning and you're leaving in the middle of the night. And the mission had gone, it was finished. We were on our way home. It was a weapons cache sweep in a graveyard, actually. And we knew that looking for weapons in a graveyard the intel was that made people upset, right? Well, I mean, people were already upset, but that just seemed to like incite more anger. But that was our mission. We had to go look for I was attached to combat engineers at that point for that mission. And they got the mission. We were done. We were on our way home. Everybody was loaded up into their vehicles. And I'm on the radio, and I am super tired because we've been up since 2 a.m. I don't know if you know it, but when you're going to go on this big mission the next morning, it doesn't matter if you like try to go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, you're not sleeping anyways, right?
Right.
So I was super tired, and it's hot. And I'm on the radio. We're on the way home. And then all of a sudden, like their chatter on the radio takes a very dark turn. And they're talking about, and our doc that was with us in the back, he was like, what was that? And, it just doesn't really, the reality of what's happening around you doesn't immediately hit right away.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's casualties. We need to turn back, because I was on the radio. And so our driver, their TC, he's in charge of the whole crew. He tells our driver to turn around and go back. And we're in a 113. A 113 is a tracked vehicle. It's like, I describe it as a miniature tank. So it's on, tracked wheels, but it's like basically a box on tank tracks. But it's set up on the inside like an ambulance. So I had my, where I could put my casualties and I had all my supplies and all that kind of stuff. But the back of it kind of folds down. You don't have doors on the side. The back of it just folds down where people can enter and exit through the back. So we turn around and go back towards the incident. You don't get very much information on the radio, so you don't know what's going on. And we pull up, drop the hatch, and the casualties they start like bringing them in. And all of a sudden it just goes from like, you need to get ready to all of a sudden you're just in the thick of it. And there's people screaming and there's blood everywhere. And I take one casualty on my side of the 113. And then we have a second casualty that walks in and lays down on the other side of the 113. My casualty was carried in, and he was screaming and grabbing at everything. Anyways, he had been the gunner in a Humvee. And what had ended up happening was that an IED was in the road. And on our way back to our base, the whole convoy had gone over this IED. So all of us had already passed over this. They were one of the rear trucks, and it exploded underneath them. And when it did, it was just an instant fireball in the sky. There were 4 people in the Humvee. The gunner, when it exploded, I probably didn't feel like it at the time to him, but because of the explosion, he was ejected out of the Humvee, out of the turret. But when he was ejected out of the turret, it caught him at the knees, at the steel, and ended up compound fractures. The arteries were severed on both knees. And so they brought him in. There was just the other 3 guys that were in the truck. The fire had happened so fast and the explosion was so intense that everybody else had just been engulfed in flames. But kind of when you're a casualty in that situation, the adrenaline kicks in. And when the adrenaline kicks in, you are able to do things you didn't think you could possibly do.
Yeah.
And so this guy was a big black guy, and the only thing not burned off on him was his feet because they were covered in leather boots. But everywhere else, the darkness of his skin, it was gone. And he walked into our 113 and laid down. He didn't end up living. They got him back to the States to treat him. But even so that big situation, one of the guys that we had ended up leaving behind that had been hit, just the day was a little chaotic. He'd been hit by a sniper in addition to that explosion, was my spades partner. I didn't even know it for 3 months afterwards. When somebody just kind of quits showing up, you don't really ask where they are. And that was what happened. I didn't ask. And finally, eventually, somebody was like, "Hey, did you hear what happened to Beard?" And I was like, "Well, he hasn't been, back to our game. I haven't played spades with him in a while." And he was like, "Yeah, I remember that mission with the IED and the railroad tracks, because it was on railroad tracks and exploded." It's like, yeah, he was hit by a sniper that same day. I was the medic that day. I was the medic. That was my friend. I didn't even know it. And he was just one of many. So, just kind of, when you're in that situation and war bonds you, it's also going to leave a mark.
So was it at this point, or was it some point earlier? Did you start noticing your worldview started to change? As you're noticing the situation that you're actually experiencing what the reality of war and what was really going on firsthand. Was it
Yeah.
at that point, or was it some time earlier, or was there any other specific event where you noticed a profound change in the way you were thinking?
My second deployment, my NCO was anti-war. And
NCO means
non-commissioned officer. So he was in charge of me. I was a non-commissioned officer also. I was an E5, which means enlisted rank level 5, basically. And he was an E6. So he was 1 rank above me, but he was actively questioning the purpose of Iraq while we were getting ready to deploy to Iraq. So that was in 2006. That had some influence. But it wasn't until 2014 when everything just kind of came crashing down. Because at this point, so I got out in 2007. My husband didn't get out until 2011. So 4 years later, after I got out, he's also getting out of the Army. And then we moved up here to Minnesota. And in 2014, United States pulled forces out of Iraq, and ISIS moved immediately in. And one of the first places that ISIS went when they came into Iraq was Ramadi. And they took Ramadi. The city that we had fought for and bled for and died for and sacrificed for was gone within weeks. And because of that, I really just, I mean, I tried not to. I tried to be like, I shouldn't be listening to the news. I shouldn't be paying attention. But it was like a drug. Like I had to know what was happening. I had to know what was going on. I had to hear the reports. I didn't want to believe it was true. But Ramadi was under full ISIS control. And the reports that were coming in of what they were doing to civilians, Iraqi civilians that were there, were horrendous. And so because of that, I started asking myself just what was the point? And a part of that was falling into this deep depression of questioning and feeling. It was just the futility and the hopelessness of having lost so much, having so many people that were just severely impacted by our experiences. I probably know just as many people at this point that have committed suicide since then as that actually died in the war. And I mean, it was already a lot. So nobody came home from that okay. And then 2014, ISIS come in, and I'm just like being able to maintain myself. I was doing pretty good most of the time. But then that was it. It was like having, the rug pulled out from underneath you and having to come to terms with the pointlessness of your mission and the pointlessness of your friends dying and the pointlessness of everything that you went through. And the only conclusion that I came to was that I just needed to accept that we should never have been there. That was, we just simply never should have been there. And that if I had been in that situation where somebody rolled up into my city and was trying to tell me what to do, and they weren't they weren't like an American like me. So if somebody came into an American city and was trying to tell me, you're not allowed to stay out past 8 o'clock at night, you're not allowed to have weapons to protect you, they're taking away the stability of your government, they're replacing it with something that is directly more harmful to you and your family and your prosperity, then I would have fought back too. So I came to terms with that the Americans had been the terrorists. That was us. We did that. And from there, once I came to that, and once I was able to admit that to myself, there was like this anger that I had to do something with. And so that was about the time that I just started really, I was just very anti-government, anti-everything, and that was where it started. But from that.
So I have some more questions to ask, but before we go on, did you want to touch on that? You met someone very special in the Army. I didn't know if you wanted to tell that story or not. I don't want to pry.
No, it's fine. I did.
But I know he meant a lot to you.
I did. Yeah, I met somebody, and I did not go to Iraq to meet somebody. But I did, and he was a fellow medic. I cared a lot about him. And 3 weeks before he came home, they were in an incident. He wasn't even supposed to be there, but that he was just, the loyalty that he had was so great for the other guys in his company and in his platoon that when they went out on a mission, he just made sure that he went with them. And because he did, they were hit that night and they were all killed. And yeah, it was 3 weeks before he came home.
And you were engaged to him?
No, not officially. No, he had told a friend that he was going to ask me, but he never had the chance.
So what are some positive things about him though? Like, I know it's a tragic story, but like, what made you fall in love with him?
He was just one of those types of people that you don't meet very often. He was genuine and sincere, and he cared about, he was not that, he put everybody else in front of his own needs and his own desires. And that was why he was there that night. He just he was, in some ways, he was a lot like me. He also did not sleep. So we took it full
That how
advantage.
you have more hours in the day.
Yeah. Like when we were together and people heard us talking, they would be like, "Oh, you guys should have a radio program and just call it the ADD show." Like that was kind of the way it was. And but he was just like, everybody loved him, everybody that he came in contact with, because there was just simply nothing not to like. He was different. And those kind of people don't come around very often.
Yeah. And there's a lot of men in probably to
Oh yeah.
you could pick from a lot of people. So.
There was about 4,000 people in our brigade and less than 75 women.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So then I think you told me this once, that you at one point, maybe this was after, once you realized, kind of, but the trauma got to you, and then you said you were, I don't know if you would describe it as suicidal, but you just wanted to fight until your last breath. And,
yeah, that was why I went
go
back
to Valhalla or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That was why I went back to the second deployment.
Because you basically you wanted to be taken out, kind of thing.
I went back. I didn't really have much left. I felt like I didn't. There was just there's a brokenness that comes with going through something like that you don't really ever heal from. And you can either do something with it, or you can allow it to consume you. And instead of allowing it to consume me, I decided to do something with it. And so I re-enlisted in the Army even after that whole first deployment, re-enlisted in the Army. And then I tried out to get into this security platoon that was at that time all men. I was the only female that tried out for it. And on the order of merit, when the results of our tryout came back, I ended up in the number 2 slot for the tryouts for this platoon.
So you beat out all of the men except one?
Yeah, I did.
Wow.
Yep. And and I was a medic, so it was a skill that they needed too. So I became the medic for the platoon for a while, and then once we got into Iraq, we took in a few more medics. But yeah, I went to that knowing that we would be on the road every day, that we would be doing potentially, like the QRF, the quick reactionary force missions, those kinds of jobs that would, like I would be in harm's way when I left, and we wouldn't spend very much time on the base. And I just went with the understanding that because of those jobs and because of where we are going, that there was a very high probability that something could happen, and I was okay with that.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about, were you going to say something, Brett?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Ask your question.
Okay. You were talking about your, anti-war, and kind of how you realized that. And I think a lot of people don't realize how hard it was for you to reach that conclusion, because we think like, well, you're anti-war, you were in the war, so you saw the worst of war. Like, maybe you're just burnt out from seeing such terrible things happen. But it's like knowing such terrible things happened and then reaching the conclusion that not only was it pointless, but it was, you guys were the terrorists. I mean, that's an incredibly difficult decision or
Yeah. Most people won't allow them to even consider that. I know Keith, my husband, because he did those same deployments at the same time. We didn't know each other during the first deployment, but he was still part of the brigade then.
Okay.
So we were in the same areas at the same time. And he didn't end up coming to the conclusion that we were the terrorists until he actually read my article that I wrote for the Libertarian Party. That was
Wow.
so there's like this, there's this disconnect, and really it's for, barriers that you put up to help you deal with what you've been through. But like I said, for me, when it came time to having to come to terms, it was either going to consume me or I was going to do something with it. And I was not going to let something consume me. I was not going to let something else win. And maybe it's that mentality, like that I'm not going to let somebody else's opinion dictate. I was going to overcome it no matter what. But yeah, he didn't reach that conclusion until I wrote that article.
Incredible. By the way, you can check out the LPMN Substack. It's in there. We'll put a link in the show notes.
So you mentioned that like it didn't really start hitting until after you were home, and it was kind of after the fact. Like, could you maybe like flesh out like what was that like that period after you were home and you knew you weren't coming back, and just readjusting from that life to back to like the civilian world?
Yeah, I pretty much jumped from being a soldier to motherhood, like overnight. And that was there's just not two more contrary jobs, really. So, you have to be.
I can imagine.
Yeah, when you're raising kids, they're going to do better if you're better. But I was going through a very, very hard time period too. So, and at the time when I got out of the Army, so I got out in 2007, Keith was still in the Army. And because he was a drill sergeant at the time, we actually never saw each other. So his schedule was 4 a.m. in the morning to 10 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, because they're always with their soldiers for training. He was coming home basically. And at one point I was just like, why are you even coming home? Like, just set up a cot, at your company area. You're driving home just to get 3 hours of sleep and then turning around and going right back to work. I mean, just stay there. You'll get more sleep.
They really make them work so they don't get sleep. Like that?
I've thought about doing that at my job, and I don't put in nearly that amount of hours.
I mean, that's crazy.
And it was a 2-year rotation. So when you're a drill sergeant, you're supposed to be on the trail for 2 years. So I was looking at, having just come home from that last deployment, and him also, he was also feeling all these things also, but he could, because he was still in the Army, he could focus his energy on his job. But my days were spent with small children who needed a lot of patience. And by this time we had 3 kids. I didn't quite understand at that point yet how easily we could have children. Because I had one daughter from my previous marriage, so she was a little bit older. But then I actually came home from the second deployment early because I was pregnant. And then as soon as Keith got home from the second deployment, I was pregnant again. And so by the time he was a drill sergeant, I was just about to have our third baby. So pregnant, 2 small children, and then looking at the potential of him being a drill sergeant for 2 years with that 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. schedule, 7 days a week, and going through all the post-war trauma and all that fallout. Our brigade had actually had gotten deployed a third time within a year of him being on the trail and being a drill sergeant. And as soon as they went, they got deployed a third time, the casualty reports started rolling in because they went to Afghanistan, the third deployment. And that was another reason why I got out, because I didn't have enough time left in my contract to go to South Carolina with Keith, even though he had orders. I did have enough time left in my contract to get caught in another deployment. So if I hadn't gotten out, I would have gotten sent to Afghanistan for a year with the brigade. But I got out.
What time period was that?
How does that work with your kids too?
They don't care.
Okay.
The Army has what they call a family care plan. And so you better to deploy. And that's just as simple as that. And if you don't have a workable family care plan, you're not allowed to stay in the Army. So that was how I was able to get out, was because of not having a workable family care plan. I was able to cut my contract short and get out and then go with Keith to South Carolina.
So what time period was that again? Like what years was that? The third deployment?
Must have been 2008.
Okay.
So the movie The Outpost, I don't know if you've seen that movie. That was my brigade. That was us. Okay. That was the 361 Cavalry. That was who we were. We lived right next to in Baghdad. I knew those guys. I knew the guys in the movie.
Wow. So you got back. You were domesticated.
Yeah.
But you went, kind of back to normal life, and with 3 kids. At one point, you reached. It's fun. I've heard a lot of this already before, so I know what to ask. But you reached this stage where, for one thing, you're still alive here. Not only did you escape the war, but you escaped, suicide, which so many people haven't.
Yeah.
What is the defining moment that made you decide to go on? You mentioned an experience.
Yeah. So when my boyfriend died in Ramadi during the first deployment, that was the end of 12 months of just absolute living hell. And it was just, I remember, so I wasn't sleeping at all anymore. Like I was sleeping even less than I sleep now. But
how many hours is that?
Not nearly enough, probably. That's what I've been told.
No, I mean at the time.
Oh, at the time, not at all. Like literally not at all.
Wow.
So anyways, different story. But I was a smoker, so I was standing out back behind our tent. And Iraq, one of the things about it is that it has like the most beautiful skies, sunsets, just gorgeous because the dust in the air. The stars at night are just, it's amazing because you're out in the desert. So there's not a lot of light pollution and they weren't allowed to have their lights on anyways. So like there wasn't any, you could just see everything. And I remember standing there and I'm watching like the stars are just gorgeous. And I'm so broken at that point. Like finding out about his death was just like I wanted to just not be alive anymore either. Like I was just so when you're with somebody that you think you're going to be with them throughout your life, and then all of a sudden in like a moment's notice they're just gone, and trying to come to terms with that. And so I was standing out back, middle of the night, stars are beautiful, and there's a firefight out in the city. And I can see the firefight because the Army puts tracer rounds in between, their regular bullets. So at night, for the purpose of at night, if you're in a firefight, you can at least see where something is going every, I can't remember how many is like third or fourth, fifth bullet or something like that. But you have tracer rounds in between your regular bullets. And they're bullets also, but they're a color when you shoot them. So And I'm seeing this firefight, and I'm just like, God, just, one bullet. That's all it would take. Like, I can see them. They're right there. Just let this be an end. I'm ready to be done. I don't want to go on anymore. I'm tired. I don't want I can't do this anymore. And at that moment, like coming to terms with, if I have to keep going on, that my life is going to be vastly different. Like my understanding of what's important and what is not important is just going to be extraordinarily, like a radical change. And I came out of that with the understanding that if I was going to keep living through life, that I was going to do so because other people needed something from me. And I was going to live my life serving in a way that helped benefit other people around me. Because if I was going to live for myself, I wasn't going to live at all, because I didn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to, if I was in the position where I needed to keep living, that it was just going to have to be a life of service, because I couldn't live for myself.
Yeah. That's a rough place
Oof.
to be and to reach that conclusion.
Yeah, we're kind of at a loss for words.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's okay.
that's a pretty powerful feeling, though. It's what that's what you've kind of fell back on and use it as a defense mechanism of sorts, I guess, to like give you a reason to push forward and carry on, if no other reason for that everyone else and not for yourself. Yeah, I guess I don't even know what to ask at this point. Like,
so where did so that was kind of the deep dark moments.
Yeah, probably.
So where did things lead after that? What brought you out of that? How did you and what was like the high points that you rose to after that? What was the journey that took you there?
Well,
also the road to Damascus story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's probably a story for a different time, but I ended up came home, and my husband and I met about 6 months later. And when we met, I was still very much in the middle of the grieving process. So, and I told him, I was like, I see that you potentially be serious about this. I'm just letting you know that you're never going to get that from me. I have no desire to have a serious relationship. This is never going to work out. Nothing's ever going to come of this. I had this person and he died, and I'm still very loyal to him, even if it's just in memory. And instead of Keith saying to me, well, fine, then I'm leaving, he was like, that's okay if for me to feel like that. And, just kind of decided to take on my situation and try to help me heal. Really, that's what he did. So he's never tried to compete with the memory. I can openly discuss everything that I'm feeling on the anniversaries and the days where things are hard. He always shows compassion and empathy. It's never been a source of strife for us. So we got married, and because it was I just didn't see any reason why he wasn't, marriage material. I couldn't come up with a reason why I should not marry him. And so I got married, and we started very quickly having a family. So have a lot of kids now, and just kind of focus on that. And we have a farm, raise our kids on a farm, and homeschool and do all those kinds of things.
How many kids do you have?
12, actually.
Wow, very cool. So how far apart are they?
My oldest is 19 now, and I am currently pregnant. So the youngest will be 0 beginning of August sometime.
Oh, wow. I'm one of 8, and there's a 20-year span with the 8. So.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm almost at 20 years. She'll be 20. My oldest will be 20 in November, so it's almost there. Yeah.
That's cool.
And then, you guys also like homestead, so like that is a whole lot of work all into itself, on top of
Yeah.
taking care of the kids, homeschooling,
Yep.
all of that, and then you add your activism on top of that. It's like, how do you do it?
She doesn't sleep. She just told us.
I
She does have more hours in the day.
I don't think about it. If I do think about it, it's really easy to get weighed down by, you know, what's going on and what the expectations and what you need to do are. And so I have kind of approached it as, you know, this is what's next, and this is what's next after that, and this is what's next after that. And then just kind of you know, I guess faith in the situation that it's all going to work out for the better at the end, but not focus. I mean, I have a big picture of, you know, the direction of where we want to go, but that big picture, I'm also not, I don't wrap my identity around it. So it can be changed. We're constantly, like, the big picture isn't usually changing, but it's, you know, like the direction on how to get there is always that path is changing.
So I'm not gonna pry again, but did you want to tell the Road to Damascus story? or
No,
you
I
wanna
don't
pass?
think so. I don't think
Okay,
I'll
we
tell
can
that
pass.
story.
I do want to bring up some of these comments, though. They're pretty awesome. Let's see. Rebecca is saying that quiet part out loud. Love to hear it, even if it's painful. She's also said these are the. Oh, this is a different guy. These are the stories that need to be heard, spoken before people are so gun ho to get into war.
Yeah, I'll definitely be recommending this show to this particular episode to some people I wouldn't normally recommend this show to. This is hitting different.
Forrest Mommy says, "Good luck with the chair race." Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I'm running for the chair of the Libertarian Party of Minnesota. So, yeah.
Well, we could actually start. Didn't you run for school board as well? How was that?
I did. Yep. Yeah, that was interesting. That was
in Bemidji, right? That's
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. School board in Bemidji. I was one of 13 people that ran for the position that I was running for, and only 2 could make it, and I was number 5 on the list, so didn't make it on the school board. But by the time the school board election was actually happening, I'd kind of decided that, you know what, somebody else can do this, and I was feeling like I needed to go in a different direction anyways. That a lot of the problems the schools are facing, that the school board members need to manage, they actually have very little to no control over, and that it really needs to be changed at a legislative level and not on a school board level. So the things that I wanted to do and the changes and the influence that I wanted to be part of being on the school board really would have tied my hands. So I was I went into the election being like, please, I just really don't want to win this. So, but I got number 5.
You got your wish. Well, and you also, like, would you consider yourself a shy person, or maybe like a reserved person, or a little both?
A little of both. I don't generally seek the attention that doing things like that gives me. That's not something that I'm super comfortable with. I'm very terrible at marketing myself. So I kind of just, when I ran for school board, my way of running was just by talking to people, really, and getting to know people. And I had like a Facebook page. I just kind of make these posts about my philosophy and like where I would like to see the schools go and that kind of stuff. And that was the majority of, and I actually realized through that because of, like, we homestead, I'm also part of the farmers market in town. I've been part of the farmers market in Bemidji for 10 years and part of the board for the last 9 years. So I didn't realize how many people I actually knew in town until I ran for school board, and it's pretty significant. So just by name recognition alone, I did pretty well. But like I said, I've been every Saturday for the past 10 years has been in downtown Bemidji with the farmers market. So I think that helped a lot.
I think, and also I think those sort of things are great. We need to start building more like local economies, things like that, more farmers markets. And
yeah. Yep. Ag is definitely one of those necessary things that it's the basis of life. So you got to eat.
Yeah.
What got you into like homesteading and all of that? Was it just natural?
I think so. I think I've always been a farm girl.
Yeah.
And
You didn't grow up on a farm though, did you?
oh no, I was a
Mhm.
preacher's kid.
What?
Yeah, I was a preacher's kid. Yeah. Yeah. I don't really know what to say about that. So
So, what inspired you to homeschool your children?
the system. When I got out of the Army, I was still like, I'd been going to college the whole time I was in the Army. I was taking classes here or there, and I'd done a lot of classes, but still didn't have a degree. So when I got out of the Army, I went back to school. It was one of the first things I did was go back to college. And I've just always been kind of one of those people that's driven to learning stuff. And so finished a bachelor's in English, and then went to graduate school for education. And so when I went to graduate school for education, part of that is working in the school system. You have to do observation hours and student teaching as part of your requirement to get a certification to be able to teach. So I was in the school districts doing the observations, talking to teachers, and realized that the schools, when I was going through that, were not the same schools that I graduated from in 2000. So, and I'd only been, 6 months. So I was basically a 90s kid. And the schools had drastically changed. They were not the same. The mentality was not the same. The management was not the same. The kids were not the same. And if I had finished my degree, my master's degree in education, my kids were going to end up being in the school system that I taught in. And so I dropped out instead and went to homeschooling. So that was how much I disliked this situation, the system that I saw.
So, can you describe what the major differences you saw were?
There's a lot of programs that are, on paper, I'm sure that they sound really good, but realistically, they just don't work.
Okay.
For instance, so we were in South Carolina still at that point. One of the schools that I was at doing my observation hours, they were a Spanish immersion school, which meant that every day they did a Spanish class. But the Spanish class, in theory, that sounds great, right? Like you're teaching elementary age kids when it's easiest for them to learn a foreign language. That's no way that could possibly go wrong.
Right.
Except that the way that they actually implemented it was by having a Spanish teacher on a pre-recorded screen and just basically like, what was that cartoon with the little girl that was, like
Dora Explorer?
Yes, that's what it was like. And there was no it was like the teacher's doing the Spanish on the screen. I'm looking around the room and watching the kids. None of them are actually saying anything. And the teacher of the class doesn't know Spanish because they had previously been a French immersion school. So she understood some of the French, but she doesn't know anything about the Spanish. The kids aren't engaging because it's just a TV show. And it's right before lunch. They're hungry. They're restless. And if you're going to teach a foreign language, I think that's an amazing idea. But the best way that you could make it the most ineffective is by making it a government program, letting them control how you implement it.
Yeah.
So that was and the teacher spent really the teacher in the classroom I was in, she spent most of her time doing paperwork that the state, because there was the No Child Left Behind Act, getting for the standardized testing and all the federal requirements. She wasn't actually doing much teaching at all, and I didn't like being told what to do, honestly.
I've heard they do a lot of grading, and I wonder if it's like the hospital system where like they've done like a graph and they'll show like the number of like doctors growing very slightly and nurses, and then it'll show like the bureaucracy or the like the paperwork or administrative. And it's just like
Oh, yeah.
shoots its skyrates way up. So it's like that's where all of our effort and money for like hospitals and stuff is going. I'm sure it's the same thing going on in the
Oh, yeah.
schools.
Absolutely.
yeah. If you look at the disproportionate amount of growth in the administrative sector and the public schooling, when you look at it, when you increase funding, like it doesn't actually go towards anything substantive.
No. And
I
it
thought
doesn't matter
that's-
how much money you throw at them. The quality of education does
And,
not increase.
Well, the entire model is flawed to begin with. It was actually based
Yeah.
off of the old Prussian academy system, which is basically designed to create obedient workers for factory workers, which is why guys like Henry Ford and Carnegie and Rockefeller really pushed for the public school system back in the early 20th century.
Yeah, I couldn't swing it to homeschool my kids, but like I went to, or my wife was telling me that one of my daughters isn't very good at like listening and getting into line and stuff like that, and I was just like, yes. And she's like upset with me, but I'm like, I hope she keeps that. Like,
Yeah. Well,
and
there's
then,
just
I don't
some
know. Like,
kids-
I was homeschooled too, so like I don't even know what it's like. And I went to my daughter's school for breakfast, and it's just like, I don't know. I understand how they're built like prisons. You know, like they
Yeah.
give you your
Mhm.
lunch, and then they have the bell, which is like a
Everything's all structured. You're getting your information from an authoritative source. You're not supposed to question the teacher. The teacher's always right. They're not encouraging you to go and explore your curiosities. None of that.
Yeah. Like my kids, a lot of them take after me. So they're just not going to excel in an environment where they just are not allowed to explore.
right.
So,
Well, no kid does. And
yeah,
I didn't
no,
realize this till I had kids. How much kids want to learn?
yeah.
Right. Yeah, they're
Well,
little
it's an
sponges.
innate part of who you are to explore,
They're so excited to
discover,
learn
create.
to read and
Especially
their colors and all that stuff. Like I
especially
don't remember
boys.
doing that, but
Boys don't do as well in the current schooling system.
because it's
because-
run by women.
Yes, but no, because they just learn different. They're more
Yeah.
hands-on. So little girls are more receptive to formal schooling, even though that is not the proper way to actually educate children. I mean, the modern schooling system is something that's pretty new in the human existence. Like, I mean, it's only been around for a little over 100 years.
Right.
Well, and boys are also more exploratory than like girls. So, like
And the other thing is it doesn't put able-bodied adults into society. Our school system is so, I mean, and that's what the school system was designed to do, supposedly. And it's so broken that like it puts unless there's good parenting involved, also the school system just leaves
That
children
doesn't teach you
utterly
anything.
helpless.
Doesn't teach you any important life skills. Like, nothing
No.
useful. I mean, well, why do I still know y equals mx plus b? I've never used that in my entire life.
does it?
I've used a squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's about all I've used from algebra. I use that
Right.
one to
Right.
make a pitch of a roof. That's about the only
Okay.
when we're building something.
Wasn't it funny when they told us, like, well, you're not always going to have a calculator with you.
Yep,
Yep.
pretty much.
And it's not to saying like math and science and geometry aren't useful, but those are like the higher levels, which are useful at very specialized fields. I mean, the most of us like could have done better off like taking more shop classes in high school than English or some sort of arts class.
Yeah, well, I can tell you the only time I've used my English degree was to homeschool. So
Right.
Well, I think we're running about out of time. Do you have any final pitch for being chair or anything like that you want to leave on? Or
do you want my simple 56-point plan?
yeah,
I could, oh, the whole thing?
no,
We can discuss that later.
yeah, there you go. Where can people follow you and your work? Are you writing for the LPMN a lot?
I am, and it's on Substack or in the newsletter, right?
Right. Yeah.
So those two areas, I have written a few things, and
And you're on Facebook and Twitter.
yeah, Facebook technically. I have a Twitter account. If there's anybody out there would like to help me manage it, that would be really nice.
Well, cool. Thanks everyone for watching the podcast. And like they were saying in the chat, make sure you like, share, and comment. And best people are Becca has the right attitude.
100%.
Yeah, but for sure, like, share and comment. You don't have to share, but you do have to like, because it costs you nothing, and you do have to subscribe. We don't have a Patreon, so the only way you can support us is by liking and subscribing, which is free. You guys take care. We'll see you next week at this time roughly.